Over the next hour, we'll be diving into the planning and preparation that went into BizBash's second ever hybrid event. And as we share ideas, strategies, and takeaways from the event during today's discussion, I encourage the audience to add any questions into the chat, and we'll address them during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. Now, let's meet today's panelists, shall we? I'm joined today by the very talented group of industry experts that brought BizBash's event to life, both on site and online. First, joining us from our esteemed event technology partner, MeetingPlay, is CEO Joe Schwinger and Director of Marketing, Randy Platt. To provide some context, MeetingPlay powered our virtual experience at BizBash Tampa with our all-in-one virtual, in-person, and hybrid platform. Next up, we have BizBash Tampa's executive producer, Erica Lamar, founder of Akiri Productions. And last, but of course not least, I have to say that, he's my boss, I'm thrilled to introduce BizBash President Matt Johnson. Thank you all so much for being here. I am pumped for today's discussion.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, we're excited to be here.
Well, we have some great content to cover for today's case study, so let's dive in, shall we? My first question, I'd like to start things off with Matt. What was your team's experience in preparation for BizBash Tampa? And if you could just walk us through the journey as you decided to take this event hybrid.
Sure, absolutely. And Ashton, I loved your intro. We'll talk about a pay raise tomorrow. So thank you for that. I will tell you first off to open us up. I have been involved with live events for about 16 years. But I got to be honest, we have entered a new, very exciting era of events. I think collectively, event planners would agree that right now it feels a little bit like the Wild West. There's a lot of trial and error going on. And there's also a lot of, I guess the collective theme would be learning as we go and grow. And oh, by the way, throw in the times we're living in where the next variant could come into play and make you shift your strategy weekly. And also, and maybe unfortunately, we're now in a time where news headlines and clips and Twitter feeds drive customer sentiments more than ever. So this was actually BizBash Tampa, our third event throughout the pandemic. And I'd like to give some context there. So back in 2020, in October, we partnered with Marriott Hotels on a live event that was designed to safely showcase how you could get back to live events. While that was a very successful program, nothing about it was virtual. Boy, did I hear about that. Fast forward to May of this year, we set out to produce our first hybrid event, very, very exciting, in Las Vegas in May. But unfortunately, 1 month before that event happened, our event technology partner came to us and said, unexpectedly, we're unable to produce or power this event. So we scrambled, we hired a producer, and we said, how can you make a glorified Zoom event look really, really good? Now, I'd say we were also successful with that, being our first, because we also invested in an MC that we felt could bridge the gap between the virtual experience and the in real life experience. However, feedback came in after the show and said, you guys focused a little too much on taking us all on a collective journey as things were happening real time in Vegas. And we simply forgot that if you weren't there, you were likely stuck in your home, juggling a busy, crazy week with lots of distractions, and that you necessarily couldn't be there when we wanted you there. Now we're learning. Then fast forward to Tampa this past month, we finally took a step back and said, what's the good, bad, and ugly of what we're doing? And why haven't we adapted the Netflix model, right? So we looked at and we said, we're a subject matter expert, but there are other subject matter experts out there. And instead of treating people like a vendor or a contractor, or you play a certain role in our event, why don't we get everybody into the same room? So we partnered with an award-winning event technology platform. We doubled down on an incredible producer. And we said, guess what? Here's your BizBash polo and your name badge. Swallow the pill. You're on our team now. And we sat back and we said, how do we make this a collective mission where every organization wins, right? So at that point, the magic started to happen. And that's when it all came together for us and it clicked, is that by bringing everybody to the table, having weekly strategy meetings, and finding a collective goal, then you find success. So for us, with MeetingPlay and Akiri, they took our hands, we locked arms, and they said, we got it from here. We understand your theme, your overall objectives, and what you want your desired outcome to be. So for me personally, as the show organizer, I couldn't be more grateful for the two organizations in this room who made us look good by doing what they do very well. And at the end of the day, we're learning from this experience, and we're so excited to see what we do next.
If I could go off script, maybe just a little bit. Sorry, Ashton.
No, go ahead.
To make it as collaborative as possible. You know, this is actually something that I've been talking about ever since November of last year when we were working with Marriott. One of the key, one of the key tips that we continue to give meeting planners is everybody has to be at the starting line together, right? And as an event technology company, quite frankly, this is fairly new. Pre-pandemic, when you're talking about mobile app, on-site badging, all the or even execution and activation on property, we would come a little bit further down the planning process, right in the middle. And there have been some key decisions that were made between the start of the planning and when we got involved. And that simply, quite frankly, is the biggest risk that I tell meeting planners they have in a post-pandemic environment, is when you don't have everybody at the starting line together. We have seen headlines of pivots that are happening, but we've also seen headlines of events that are basically canceled a week out. And you look at those events, you're like, not everybody was at the starting line together, because somebody would have raised their hand and said, are you thinking about X? So I think what Matt said is, if you could take away anything from today, I would actually pause and say, everybody needs to be at the starting line together. And everybody needs to have their plan B and their plan C. And somebody needs to wake up in the morning thinking about plan D, because the other thing that, Matt alluded to that I'm happy to talk more about is every hybrid event that we do and every event that I go to on property, quite frankly, there are learnings that are happening every hour, and there's an adjustment that is happening after that. Matt talked about the feedback that he was getting, most likely live in Vegas and then after. And by the way, Erica, you did a wonderful job with production.
Thank you.
But those learnings are happening in real time. And I think that it is difficult for planners that are, want everything by the book to live in this environment. I'm certainly that way as well. But I can't tell you how many pivots I'm seeing literally on property as there are learnings that are going on. So some really key nuggets that you dropped there for us, Matt, that I wanted to highlight before I turned it back over to Ashton. Sorry to take the thunder there.
No apology needed. I love the conversation, and I couldn't agree more. I think that, from the editorial side, hearing and reading and writing about all of these hybrid events happening, communication was definitely important beforehand with live events. When you're working with two separate audience, separate events, being cohesive, it's even more important that everyone is with each other on the start line. And as someone who experienced BizBash Tampa but wasn't involved in the organizing process, I will say it went beautifully, Matt. You were right. And I think we took a lot of the feedback from Vegas, implemented that in Tampa, and much to your point, Joe, we're taking a lot of feedback from Tampa, and it's going to be even better next time. And I'm really excited.
Well, Ashton, one note I'll say, and Joe, you're spot on. So everything that we were trained to do and that we've done in our entire career that we could flawlessly execute with our eyes closed, it kind of feels like that's all gone out the window, and that we're now collectively co-authoring a new playbook. And we're looking at what everybody else is doing and doing exceptionally well and trying to craft that in, all while monitoring what is next week or next month's attendee behavior going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. What other last minute pivots or things are going to be thrown at me? We had no idea that within a month and a half of arriving in Tampa, that the Delta variant was trending. And at the last minute, I'd say had a pretty significant impact on the amount of people who felt comfortable being at that show versus being really grateful that we had that virtual option where they could shift their ticket and their participation mode.
Matt, I agree with you. And I think one of the most important skills that an event professional can have today, more important than ever, not that it wasn't always important, is to be agile, because I think that things change on a dime, and you have to, sometimes it's something that you would never have anticipated, and you just have to be prepared and be willing to be flexible and flip, in your professional skills.
Yeah, here's some statistic for you on that as well. And like Matt said, we were all going back to the old days, and then Delta came and messed things up. So to go to you don't know what you don't know, let me just give you kind of some other things that we're hearing. We're roughly seeing anywhere between a 25 and a 35% cancellation within 10 days of the event due to the uncertainty that's going on in the environment. So the one thing that we are hearing from people is that they are so grateful to have a choice. So again, I was speaking a couple of weeks on stage at an actual live event, and I was reading the comments that were coming in from the virtual environment. And these were some corporate planners that unfortunately couldn't make it because of travel restrictions at the corporate level. And all you could see was, thank you so much for giving me a choice. And ultimately, they would not have heard the updates that were going on in the industry had they not had that option, because certainly all meeting planners want to be on property, right? If there was one thing that I saw in Tampa, it was letting their hair down after 18 months and finally getting back together. But there are other people that do not have that option. So the thinking about the attendee and that choice and giving them one, again, goes back to being at the starting line with everybody to properly plan how you can bring those two worlds together.
Absolutely. And Erica, speaking from the production side, you've been BizBash's production partner for numerous events. So I'm really interested to hear from your perspective what you would consider to be that secret ingredient to ensuring these events are successful.
Yeah, honestly, it's that we keep evolving. Mm-hmm. We are not doing the same thing twice. As that's a past thing too. We've always tried to, what's the next level? What's the next level? What are we going to do? But taking that feedback and really listening, the way we learn and our learning styles has really changed in the last year. So our audience has, changed the way that they're responding. So being able to continue to take that feedback, hear our audience, and be able to deliver on that has been exciting. I think I've always loved this hybrid world. I know it seems like a big new term that we've all been using, but the broadcast is not new per se, but it's how we're addressing, the at home, like Joe, like you were saying, how are we giving them the choice and what are we giving them, right? Being able to have the on-demand speakers, ahead of time and still available for people to go back and watch and hear those experts on their time and not be just restricted to the times that we're, on site during the event and when that's live, I think is awesome. As also someone in the industry, right? Like when we're doing the events, it's awesome, but I want to go back and watch them all, right? Like when you're calling the show and you're in the production, you don't get to actually take away as much as you could. And, I just think even too, on site, we're hearing and we're listening to what's happening from our virtual audience. I know it's going to come up, but I'll just preview of being able to pivot on site when somebody says something and we can go, oh, let us react to that and happen to bring it on stage, and having MCs to do that and carry our storyline all the way through. That's been a big takeaway in this last year. MCs were always important, but I think with this bridge of the two audiences is really, just it's that glue that really, keeps it together. So yeah, I mean, we keep evolving. We can't do things the same way. We never should. And like Matt said, and Joe for that matter, we are rewriting how events happen. You know, I keep saying this term, but none of us have a playbook or a blog to read from the 1920s, the last time this happened. So I would like to be and continue to, you know, in this group too, because it's been an amazing collaboration. We're all thought leaders, and I want someone in 100 years. Let's maybe less than that. Okay. I don't really want this to happen to anybody again, but like at the same time, something in the world is going to happen in whatever decade. And why not be the opportunity to, you know, mentor and show and say how we evolved and how, you know, we came out of it.
Completely agree. And we've even had previous conversations with students on site at BizBash Tampa. We had student-led volunteers assisting our attendees, and they wore awesome BizBash shirts, and they were just wonderful to work with. And to that point, they even spoke to that of like just entering this industry, knowing and being prepared, like you're saying, because who knows when this will happen again, even if it's not within their generation when they enter the industry. So completely agree.
And can I add to that? Like, we also heard that, like, we all created an opportunity for them to hear on site, be able to switch their headphones so that they could hear us calling the show and, you know, learn some behind the scenes. And it wasn't just for them, it was for all of our attendees. And we kept that note, you know, and we got great feedback from that. Little pressure on the production side, but like, you know, it was great, you know, and again, I want to be in a spot, and I think we all do, where we're giving those opportunities to stretch ourselves and grow and teach others as well, because we all have a very different role in the industry, and all of us, you know, we collaborate together, but like we kind of need to know what the right arm and the left hand, you know, all the things are doing. So being able to really connect that has been just a really cool experience together.
Hey,
I want to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Joe, I was going to add just a quick note. Erica, nobody saw you sweat the entire time. You knocked it out of the park. I had so many attendees come up to me and say, Matt, I drove down or bought a last minute ticket because I just wanted to see how you guys pulled it off. I wanted to meet the event technology folks. I wanted to see this producer. I wanted to watch the MC and understand, because again, everybody's going back trying to restart their portfolios and kind of get that plane off the ground. So I think even for me, I heard over and over, we are learning to run shows again. There's a lot of grace out there as well from an attendee experience, but I just feel like we're building momentum, not only for ourselves as a brand and our event portfolio, but also as an industry.
I was just going to add, I've never seen the tech table as clean as the one you guys were running. So congratulations on that. But I think that there's something that you said there that also reminds me of something we've been talking about for the last, 12 months is, don't treat your virtual attendees like second-class citizens, and be very respectful of the journey or the experience for each one of them. And something that I want to applaud BizBash with, Matt and Ashton and team, is that you did think of the virtual attendees and created something that was unique for them that they may not have had. And that was the educational on-demand library that was in the virtual environment. So when you were on property, you had the option to explore the exhibit hall, to learn new things, to meet people, and to see things like, the awesome setup with the AV. And that's very difficult to obviously do in the virtual environment. And you supplemented that with knowledge that I believe meeting planners are craving. So I do want to have that call out that you guys really got an A+, in my opinion, on looking at the pros and cons of the experiences, and how do you supplement and give something to the virtual audience that that they're striving for, but they weren't going to get in that virtual environment. And that was, again, A+ in my mind.
Agreed. I mean, I think there's the whole thing of people still aren't quite sure what hybrid is going to be or should be. And there's that whole mantra of show me and I'll understand. And I think being able to show something is so much more impactful as a roadmap than telling or teaching. So.
Definitely. And I wanted to provide some context to anyone tuning in today that didn't get a chance to experience our virtual side. Erica, earlier you mentioned how we were responsive or try to be more responsive to our virtual audience this go around because we're learning that from Vegas. To our viewers, there was one point I think our virtual audience was like, let's see the puppies, because our MC Kate Pate was discussing like, oh, go check out the puppy lounge like at the front of the exhibit hall, and virtual attendees were like, puppies, I gotta see this. And so at the next point we responded to that. All the puppies were brought on stage, cute as can be, falling asleep in people's arms. And additionally, Erica, to provide some more context to the headphones, our in-person audience could hear on the back end what the production team was doing behind the scenes to, again, allow event planners and organizers, and even outside of that, just what's going on now in the production world that wasn't going on before when you just had to focus on live. So I just wanted to provide some context there for anybody tuning in today that didn't get to join us. But you can still tune into everything virtually at bizbashlive.com/Tampa21, I'm pretty sure. And if you register, it's all right there, including all the on-demand content that Joe talked about earlier. And coming back to you, Joe, you played a lot of roles in this event. You were our event tech partner, a show exhibitor, and an onstage speaker. So what would you pinpoint as your key takeaway from this whole experience?
Oh boy. I feel like I've already been monopolizing the conversation. So actually, the beauty of being involved in this is that we were actually involved with a lot of touch points and not just virtual hybrid. And something else that we should talk about, that I've been talking about, is putting on your events through the lens of safety. As Matt indicated, we are still in a environment where Delta and all these other variants, and there are breakthrough cases. We still should be looking at everything that we do through the lens of safety. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't get a lot of mileage or chatter, but your arrival experience at an event will set the tone for the lens of safety through the rest of the environment. So we've talked about production, how killer of a job Eric and her team did. We talked about the virtual environment. Something else to not misplace as part of your hybrid experience is providing an arrival experience through the best safety procedures that you can. So that was something that also stood out, that we were able to work with production. We were able to work ahead of time, but we also had the opportunity to say, we want to have a safe, touchless environment when you get on property. But this is also an area where I would tell people that you need to have options and choice. So when you arrived at BizBash for the registration, in partnership with Choose to Rent, one of our partners, you were accompanied to a self-service kiosk that, through the mobile app that we provided to the attendees on property, you literally would scan, and 2 seconds later you have your name badge, and it was pretty much touchless. Mm-hmm. Now, there are people that will arrive without the mobile app, but they still want to have those safety procedures. And 10, 15 feet beyond that were friendly faces that would do all of this for you to get you your badge without you having to go through and touch things that everybody else was touching. So there were a lot of touch points. What sticks out for me as the event technology provider is going back to what Matt said. There was a great experience in Las Vegas. We needed to up it, and we needed to look at all of those components. So we were all again at the starting line, and we were looking at all of those touch points, not just 2 or 3, to provide an overall experience, right? So that kind of sticks out as something that gets forgotten, but should definitely be on your top 5 list as you're planning your hybrid experiences. The safety procedures and the message that you're sending when people get on property, that it's not business as usual, it's business post-COVID or pandemic, and here is the safe way to do things.
Yeah, business as unusual.
Yeah.
And Joe, I'd like your input here, but Brandy, feel free to jump in because your team offered so many great features that kept attendees of all types engaged throughout the event, as we mentioned earlier. So from like the on-site app you just mentioned, online features like gamification, we had networking rooms, we had surveys. The MeetingPlay software really allowed for a significant amount of interaction and collaboration on our virtual side. So what would you consider to be the most vital of these features for the success of this event, as well as other hybrid events of its nature?
Brandy, ladies first.
All right. Well, I'm happy to take this. Really interesting for me is as much as we've been kind of living and breathing and speaking virtual and hybrid events since the beginning of the pandemic, this was kind of an all-inspiring moment for me because I had not been on site to an event in person in almost 2 years. So I get to BizBash Tampa and I'm excited by the atmosphere and just the overall thrill of, being back at a live event and being able to see real people face to face. In fact, I met Joe for the first time face to face, believe it or not, at BizBash Tampa, if that tells you anything about the world we're living in right now. So, but one thing that really kind of became very clear to me as I was standing on the show floor for the first time is that there really is an intangible thing about being at a live show and being in the excitement and the atmosphere of a live event that isn't as easy to achieve in a virtual setting, because we can do all these things. We can bring excellent content, we can bring entertainment to the virtual environment, but it doesn't really capture the atmosphere of being on the show floor when we do this in a concise way. So, I think that there's something that you can give to attendees to put technology into their hands to be able to bring the excitement of the show floor back to the virtual audience. And just an example, we talked about the puppies. Well, I was very excited about the puppies. So I use the Go Live video chat functionality on our mobile app to be able to call all my colleagues that are all pet crazy back in their office to show them the puppies. I was able to showcase the look and feel of the room, back to my colleague Lauren. And then as I was walking around the show floor, it came to my attention that there was like a whole line of people with footballs in their hands waiting to get their football signed. And I was like, what is going on here? I have no idea. And this is not something that you would necessarily capture on the main stage, but I was able to turn on that video chat functionality to show everybody, hey, it's Jerry Rice and he's signing footballs for people. So, these are all the intangible things that can happen at a show that I still feel like the virtual audience deserves to know. And the good news is that is in everybody's hands, to use that video chat functionality to call attendees that are participating virtually and being able to show off, what's happening and the real atmosphere and excitement of the show. So I feel like mobile technology has come a long way, and I'm really excited that that's possible now.
And just to add to that real quick, shout out to you, Brandy, and the MeetingPlay team. Is through that app, we actually had folks, because we had 3 different stages with kind of concurrent education going on. We had people that may have missed or had to choose between one stage and another, but because of your mobile app, could go back and watch what they missed, right? Later that night, on their way home, or can consume that content now. So I thought that was a really cool feature as well.
Awesome.
I agree. And going back to what I think Joe said earlier about giving people the choice and how that is very relevant right now. I think also the choice, to make the choice not hard. You no longer have to well, which stage do I go to? I'm going to miss out on one of them. Now, of course, everything's recorded. It's all online. It's on demand. And so making those choices becomes a lot easier and just takes that stress off of the attendees, which I think is another kind of hidden benefit there to hybrid events. So Brandy, when it came to fusing the virtual and in-person attendees, what tactics were put in place to ensure a good experience for all outside of the app?
Well, definitely. I mean, we had a chat between the attendees, as the sessions were happening. There's a chat functionality that the live attendees can actually talk to the virtual attendees via chat. The other thing is that we used to drive a lot of participation on the virtual side of things was the point based gamification. And so engagement is really as everybody talks about, the new currency for events. Well, people that are participating virtually, as well as in person, need gamification, need an incentive to engage and, keep focused and not be doing 50 million things while the event's going on. And so by earning points for participating in various engagement actions via answering a question, chatting, and having an award tied to that actually got people more excited. And I think in the future, as we kind of build this out even further, I think offering some sort of incentive-based gamification for virtual and on-site attendees to talk to each other, offering points and a prize for that will actually help create that valuable connection between the virtual and the in-person audience.
Noted for 2022.
I agree. I think that, 2021 has been a lot. 2020, people mastered virtual events. And then 2022 is like, okay, well now hybrid events because we can go back on site. And then, but it's no longer, you can't just live stream. And then it became about creating two different experiences. And now it's about merging those experiences. So like you said, how do I get virtual and in-person attendees talking with each other, networking with each other? And, back to your point earlier, Matt, I think we're kind of building this plane as we fly it. And each time we think it's all together, one piece kind of falls off. There's a Delta variant, you got to put it back. And, but I think that, going back to being agile is probably one of the most important just lessons learned moving forward.
Can I add to that real quick, Ashton?
Please.
Yeah. And, I think it's also continuing to think past, I've been hearing a lot from our clients. Well, this is how we used to do it. There kind of is no used to do it anymore, right? We have to keep evolving. And that's what this group has really done for each event. So continuing to wrap our arms around that thought process, our egos have to be out the door, because what we may have wanted at the beginning of this is not going to be the same at the end of this, because we don't actually know what's going to be thrown our way. And part of that is the fun, the challenge of doing what we do, because if it was the same all the time, we'd all be very bored, and I think we just have to continue to embrace that and continue to just, wrap our arms around it. So just wanted to add that in real quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually leads me into my next question, because as hybrid events do become more popular, we're learning as we grow. I'd love to hear from everybody, if you feel led to, your one key takeaway, success, learning experience, all from this event that each of you will take with you going into planning future events.
I'll go first.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be vulnerable for a minute, but I hope this comes across as an encouragement to all event planners. We have got to quit beating ourselves up for not selling out stadiums. We're not going back to 2019. And I think we have to shift our mindset that judging yourselves by amount of in real life attendees, amount of square footage your show takes up, amount of exhibitors, amount of people sitting in an education session in a moment, that has to shift, right? Listen, I found myself counting seats just like the old days, but then I forgot. Yes, there's 8 empty, really nice chairs. Shout out to Court Event Furnishings, by the way, who did a fantastic job. Why are there 8 empty chairs? I was so excited about this speaker. I personally invited them. Then I get a little tap on my shoulder, but there's 380 people watching just this session. I would have never set the room for 380 people in an education session. So I think we have to change our KPIs. And secondly, I think that we have to shift and say you're successful if you've created an inclusive platform that meets people where they're at from a comfortability standpoint. And did you still create an experience in a moment where people could connect, business transactions took place, continued education, networking, and inspiration that moved organizations forward? That's kind of how I'm going to put on a different lens or way of thinking moving forward. And that's what I'm going to be laser focused on.
Randy, you want to go?
Sure, I'm happy to go next. So a couple of key learnings. There's really 2 that I kind of gathered from attending this event in person and then going back and watching the virtual footage afterward. So number 1 is that as we move into the future, we don't know what's going to happen, but we can't just assume that next year's attendee will be live or next year's virtual attendee will be virtual. It could be a combination of the two. There's always going to be a reason why somebody might need to participate either virtually or in person from year to year. So the experience on both ends has to be spectacular and has to give the audience what they come to your meeting for in the first place, whether it be entertainment or great education or networking or a combination of all those things. The second thing that I learned, actually, this giving a shout out to social media marketing world from about 5 years ago. I attended their event in San Diego. And one of the things that they did, which I thought was the most useful for me as an attendee, was to offer a kind of a pre-show session where it was a know before you go, like a couple of teleconferences that you could be on. And what they told us is how to really maximize networking, how to utilize your technology to the fullest. And so I think as we go into the future, especially with virtual or in-person attendees that have technology in their hands, to give them all their options so that they understand all the cool things that they can do with that technology and how to communicate and utilize it to their best interest while they're at the event.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, there was actually quite a bit. Definitely, I would say one thing to learn is puppies on stage are very popular.
For sure.
Cute in person, but also still have the same effect over a live stream. I would actually go back to, not necessarily one of the learnings that I would take away from this event, but more a confirmation of what we've been saying in practice that worked. And it was, again, creating experiences for two audiences, but blending them together. And I really go back to what Matt said is the goals of this conference. Business happened on property, right? There were thousands and thousands and thousands of appointments. There was a trade show. But the goal of the virtual attendee was slightly different because they didn't have that on-property experience, and therefore providing the education that Matt was talking about, right? So there were absolutely two different paths. But again, I compliment BizBash for putting the education on steroids for the virtual attendees, minimizing maybe the business aspects because they couldn't have that face-to-face on property, and doing so on property where they put the business aspect on steroids, and education was something that they did in between all of their business interactions. So to me, we have been talking about this, us MeetingPlay, since September of last year when we launched hybrid for Marriott. To see some of these things start to crystallize and actually be executed in the field, that's something that I continue to take away. Is if you look at your goals as a meeting planner, you use tools that help you accomplish that, not modifying your goals to the tools that you select as your partner, you will hit on all cylinders. And this event was a case study on a lot of that in terms of providing unique experiences to either attendee type, but joining them together at the end of the day around the content.
Well said.
Very much so. I feel like you all said such great points. And I think, I'll just sum it up. I think really it's, as you just hit on Joe and everybody's points, again, we just have to keep evolving and continuing to consider all the audiences, how everyone learns. Again, learning styles have been such a big difference as to how we approach in-person and virtual, and creating that bridge. And continuing to really just focus on the uniqueness of that and realize that whatever we're doing is going to impact somebody at the end of the day, whether we're in person, at home. What we're doing is connecting people. We all have a passion for people. And so as we continue to push forward in this new era of events, just what is that, and how are we going to do it better even next time. And I think, just humbling ourselves, Matt, you said it, earlier, is like, and how we measure our successes. Like, we just got to humble ourselves. It's okay. Those 8 seats we didn't sell, right? But those 400 or so that we had at home, like it's a new way of measuring what we're doing. And we're all figuring it out together. So nobody's alone either. And continuing to just have these conversations with others is what's truly important.
Well, I'm going to switch over to some of our audience questions about 5 minutes early because we have some really good ones coming in. They're getting nitty gritty on us and I love it. So first question, what was the cost implication of having a hybrid event? And did you see any ROI or cost recovery? Great question.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you look like you're thinking. Do you want me to?
You start, and then I definitely want to add some comments there.
I'm not going to speak on behalf of Matt and BizBash because they control the budget. What I did want to add, though, as Matt's thinking about that question, is we are successfully seeing event planners bridge the gap of monetizing a hybrid event in the virtual world. So here's what I keep on telling people. 8 months ago, you were competing with nothing, right? And that's why we were giving away a virtual experience in a lot of cases for free, because there was no alternative. And that is different in a hybrid environment. I will have things that are relevant to people on property, and I have cost, and I will charge so. But now, since I'm bridging this to 2 different audiences, you have the choice of, do you wish to pay for airfare, a hotel, and a registration fee, or would you rather spend 1/10 of that for the fee of the virtual? So we're successfully seeing large events, 30, 40, 50,000 people monetize that virtual. And the power in numbers that we've been seeing in the virtual world on that net, well, the power of those numbers, even at $99 a head, starts to work in your favor. So I know as planners, we are super, super budget cautious. I hear it every single day. But I do want to let you know there is light at the end of the tunnel with monetizing this finally, so that it is not cost recoverable. It is potentially, cost profitable, right? So Matt, hopefully now you have an answer.
No, listen, that's a great segue. I agree with all those comments. And I think what I hear over and over from my peers who are running shows is that it's just a simple shift in your budget. You may have spent so much money on an opening and closing reception, which now maybe doesn't have the attendance, or there just isn't the palette for that type of gathering within an event, that you would just reallocate towards that virtual experience. And then for us, embracing event technology and suddenly having a limitless global audience, do you know how exciting that is for a brand that universally had a show physically in New York and a show physically in LA? And if you couldn't make those dates, right, that's the age-old issue for show organizers. I'll have to see you next year. I'm moving a kid to college. It's over a family gathering. My cat's sick, whatever, right? We've heard it all. I can't come. But now I have people that can tune in from Singapore to Montreal to right down the road in Miami who can participate. What I'm most excited about is not just those 2 to 3 days that we're together, but it's the 365 community engagement. I can capture and bottle that up, and post it somewhere on my website, and allow people who are entering the industry or people who heard about this experience or want to go back, and they can consume that. It's like continuing education, and it's stored, right? So I think that it's a very exciting change in the way we budget for our shows.
I will say, though, that this whole 365 community thing, I think that there's definitely a marketing aspect to that, because you've got to put money behind the promotion of your on-demand content and bringing people back, and you've got to give them incentive to come back. And so I think that that's something that, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how event planners and marketing kind of merges as we move into the future. I know that there's a big need for event planners to, understand some of the tactics for marketing to be able to drive their audience to those communities.
Brandy, if you recall, we gave away a Peloton just for the virtual experience.
Yes.
Admittedly, it's because I got a lot of hate mail over, wait a minute, you're giving a Tesla away for on-site? What gives? I can't help it that I'm on a corporate travel ban. So you're spot on. You got to come up with a way to keep folks engaged, keep them excited about that experience. And again, as we said, don't treat the virtual audience like a second-class citizen.
Mm-hmm. So next question was, how did you deal with time zone differences? I feel like this is a big one everybody's trying to tackle.
Well, this one was pretty simple, right? So in this environment, the event was actually happening in a dedicated time zone. We do a lot at MeetingPlay of regional deployment and follow the sun. And I'm sure the person that's asking this question has dealt with a number of those and probably is in a corner crying because they are so difficult to do. This one was a little fortunate in that, again, when we went back and worked with Matt and we identified what the goals were going to be, education was a key pillar of what they were trying to accomplish. And we decided at that point that we would go on demand and choose your own journey as opposed to timing them, which made it easier from a time zone perspective. And then you had the live aspect, and we didn't want to cheat the experience for the live. We wanted there to be some, interaction on property. And the decision was made basically to keep it within the time zone so that we respected the live environment that was going on and all the work that Erica was doing. So this one was pretty easy. We certainly are not accustomed to all the easy ones, but it went back to looking at what the goals were on the virtual audience and the education component. And there was a decision that on demand was really appropriate for that consumption that they were trying to do.
I'll also add to that we, tried, and I think we're successful at creating opportunities for networking in different networking rooms on the platform. So based on your own availability, being able to go in on your time zone, kind of see who's there, check it out, network, chat with each other. That also was an opportunity to how you're bridging that gap, maybe people who are more regional to that time zone, et cetera. But to Joe's point, the on-demand, we made that decision about just being accessed all the time versus revealing it at certain time zones or at certain times throughout the event.
A question specifically for MeetingPlay. Do you offer statistics of post-event usage for the recorded events?
Oh, of course. So at MeetingPlay, we offer not only views, but we're offering duration in terms of how long people were there. We also have a sentiment component where when people are excited, they can express that. When they're not, they can. And we look at sentiment across the whole session to see where people were not happy, where they dropped off. We put that up against duration. And this, again, is another component that we're trying to still evolve into the hybrid environment. For 18 months, we've been drinking from a fire hose with this data. I mean, you didn't have to bring in RFID scanners and iBeacons to do all this tracking. It naturally is occurring through the platform. And now we're working to merge all that together with the on-property. But for the clients that we work with, which is typically tier 1 in a tech environment or in large events, that is one of the first questions that we get in terms of how we process and how we display.
There's actually a lot of great data out there that talks about how long somebody stays in something, dwell time being a big indication of engagement. We use that all the time when we look at data.
Ashton, you should speak to, if you want, about our 10 and 10 format that we tried out this year.
Oh yeah, so for some context for our viewers today, we did this. A big takeaway from Las Vegas was, these long format, 45-minute to an hour sessions, while very in depth and a lot of key takeaways, just aren't holding virtual audiences' attention as well as short ones. So with Tampa, speaking to evolving, we did a 10 and 10 session. So we did about 10 sessions, and each of them were 10 minutes. Myself and my colleague Claire, we spoke on one. I think we had Joe kicked off the series, but it was incredible. And I think that it did do a better job at keeping people's attention. I think that key takeaway for me personally was now we have to get the speakers on board, because I know speakers want to speak, and we have a hard time staying in 10 minutes, but I think that was a very good example of shifting and appealing to the audiences a little bit less time they have on their hands, as much as our in-person attendees do.
Mm-hmm.
We got great feedback from that as well. And a lot of people engaging during that session and post for that matter. But, I think that, again, we kind of was like, let's try to do something different, and how successful it was. And, shout out to all of the 10 and 10s, because everyone did it in 10 minutes. Literally, I'll call out Nick Borelli from All Seated, who literally did it, nailed it at that moment. So I know there was a side bet going on, so I just wanted to claim that, publicly. So.
And then this question is for you, Joe. Can you tell us one of the best hybrid events you've executed so far, and what made it great? What made it one of the best and successful?
Cool. Well, I mean, I feel as though I should say the BizBash, but since we've been talking so much about this event, I'll select one outside of that. And actually, I'm going to say the best because it was actually the most fruitful in terms of information that we brought back to our customers. And it was in November of last year, really when we were going into some of the worst times of the pandemic in the winter. We had the pleasure of working with Marriott for their first on-property event since the pandemic hit. And that was really the best because we were able to guide a monumental company like Marriott using event technology through the lens of safety. And we implemented some things that were the first in small meetings that I've ever seen. For example, again, keep in mind this was in November, right where we were moving in. There was no registration area. You actually selected your seat prior to getting on property using our seat selector tool. And when you got on property, we used proximity sensing to tell you what zone that you were going in, left or right. All of this was done with creating a touchless. We didn't really have to adhere to 6 feet social distancing because you were literally guiding your way and moving about. And where you ended at the end of your journey through that walkthrough was in your sanctuary seat. And to me, this was really special in that we knew that meeting planners wanted to get back on property, but we also knew that, and Marriott, of course, knew that safety was priority number one, and the meeting could not happen unless we adhere to all of those safety protocols. This was a very unique experience, and the feedback that we received from the meeting planners, quite frankly, went directly into our product pipeline in terms of learnings that every client thereafter benefited from on a hybrid environment. And some of those things, like I talked about the arrival experience for BizBash, are implemented still today as we're moving into more, not normal times, but more frequency of events.
Yeah, and I think we wrote on that event, and it was very intriguing. A lot of great key takeaways. So if anyone is interested, head over to BizBash. You can read more about it. It was a very, very cool hybrid experience. Last great question from the audience is, how do you convince clients that we aren't going to return to pre-pandemic events? I have proposed the education focus for virtual and business for in-person, but they struggle changing their mindset. And this is a question I've definitely heard quite a few times.
I'll take a stab at that. I'll say that my job is no longer to convince people, which direction we may or may not be going, because I don't know what's going to happen at the end of Q4. And I certainly don't know where we're going to be this time next year. My new job, as I said earlier, is to create an all-inclusive experience that whether we flex up and have a massive online, in real life experience, that equals the power and magnitude of the virtual experience that we organize.
I think it's also trying to help whoever that decision maker is, what are their end objectives, and showing what the virtual hybrid element can be to meet those objectives. I mean, Matt, let's go back to remember the first time I was like, so shouldn't we just do a virtual? And you're like, I don't know, maybe, like, you know, and it's like, if you think of, you know, that's, sometimes it is, I get it. It's like hard, right? Like, no, it's hard. It is. And I think that, you know, we have to just keep remembering we can't do things the same way we did, pre-pandemic. Even the way that we're setting up our in-person events are not the same as we were then. We are thinking about touch points. We're thinking about how we're gathering. And all those things were done previously, but there's a different thought pattern to it, right? It's making sure that people are comfortable, no matter what. Like, I mean, if we think about this, it's not just COVID, right? It could be all seasons of, it can be the flu season. It can be, you know, any of that. And how are we addressing that in the future as well? It's not just right now. The other thing that this has developed that we have to help people think of is that it's really about also the attendee and their personality type and how they are responding. You know, we have people all over, we're all different, right? Like I am definitely more extroverted. If you know me, I love to engage with you, etc. But I have my introverted tendencies, right? Mm-hmm. And are we creating opportunities for our different personality types and how they learn? So being able to go back to those key stakeholders who are making those decisions with some of the data and with some of like creative opportunities on how to execute the event. I think that's what I'm seeing starting with our clients and how they're starting to change their mindset. And it's not going to be overnight. It's definitely going to be baby steps, but just getting them opportunities and showing them how it can be done and showing other examples, I think will go a long way.
I agree. I mean, I think people are just naturally more cautious than they used to be attending events, attendees. And so, I mean, even on the floor at BizBash Connect Tampa, you know, there was an option. They highly recommended that you wear a mask. So you could kind of tell like where people were in terms of how they felt about things, whether or not they were wearing a mask at all times or how close they'd get to you when they were talking to you. So, I mean, I don't think things are ever going to go back completely to the way they were because people are just automatically going to be more cautious, not just for their own health, but just for the health and safety of the people that they love and that are around them. So that all comes into a factor as well.
And I need to formally go on the record and apologize to Erica because I was dreaming up this roadshow series. And I remember when you told me, Matt, that can't happen right now. Are you seeing what's happening regionally in all the cities you've identified? And when you told me go virtual, I said, that's ludicrous. She's crazy. I think I hung up on you and I walked around and paced my backyard for 2 hours. But do you know how wildly successful that would have been if we had MeetingPlay in our life and we could have put that together in 5 cities at the same time? Again, you know, I wrote my diary that night and we've learned, so we're going to move forward. But I did want to apologize.
You're fine. Thank you, though.
I completely agree with everything that y'all said in this last question. I also would add in that if a client is rejecting moving to hybrid, and it's probably just an educational thing. They don't know how incredible hybrid really can be. After speaking with many event organizers and their big shows, and that they've moved hybrid and all the benefits from it, namely being data, as Joe mentioned earlier, that data can help event organizers genuinely curate the quote unquote perfect event for their attendee because they will know their attendee better than they've ever known them before. I don't know if we can put trackers in like people's jacket pockets on the trade show floor, but you can do that with a virtual attendee and see what they're clicking on, see who they're interacting with. So I would just like to add that in to round us all up. But thank you all for joining us today. This case study style recap of our time in Tampa. Conversations have been incredible, insights wonderful. And for more insights on how to plan a successful hybrid event, you can actually, our attendees today can scan the QR code on your screen right now to read MeetingPlay's insightful resource. I read it, it's wonderful, strongly suggest it. But I don't know about you guys, this conversation has me so excited for the future events. Thank you again to our panelists, our amazing partners for making today's event and BizBash Tampa happen. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.